And commissioners, if you would take a moment to turn on your microphones. Welcome to the September 17th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting. My name is Janice Hexford. I'll chair the meeting, and if you would all please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. Let's start with a roll call, and I will let each of you introduce yourself, beginning with Commissioner Morton.
Bruce Morton is present. Connor Davis is here.
Nathan Packard is here.
Michael Brewer is here.
All right, and again, I'm Janice Hexford. I would ask to excuse Commissioner Jennifer Davis, who is unavailable this evening. Do I have a motion?
I'll motion to excuse Jennifer Davis.
And that's,
Doer second.
so that was Commissioner Packard and Commissioner Dewar. All in favor?
Aye.
Any oppose? Any abstain? We do have new news. Our newest commissioner, Commissioner Matz, has indicated that she needs to step down from the commission. So if you will all please join me, I'm sure that we appreciate her service and wish her well in her future endeavors. So with that, let's move on to guest business. Do we have anybody in the audience or online that would like to speak? All right, and recognizing that we have our city council liaison in the audience, as well as Cameron, who was making his second appearance at Planning Commission, if I have noted that correctly. I won't make you speak this time. Thank you for being here. With nobody online or no guest business in the audience, we'll move on then to our action items. Item number 4 is that we approve the minutes of our last meeting that was held on August 18th. Has everybody had a moment to review those meeting minutes?
Yes.
Are there any changes that you'd like to make for the record? Seeing and hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
Commissioner Packard makes a motion to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Davis seconds.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we're cooking along here. With our next item, we're going to have a discussion. Principal Planner Leviton will be conducting that, and it will be the review of critical areas, best available sciences, and then we'll stop there and take a moment until we move into the second item. Is that appropriate?
Sounds great. Thank you. All right, David Levitan, Principal Planner. I also have Amber Brokenshire, Senior Planner, who's also working on the Critical Areas Ordinance. So just a reminder, this is a periodic update of the Critical Areas Ordinance, which is Chapter 1488 of the Municipal Code. This Critical Areas Ordinance is an implementation item of the Comprehensive Plan. So following the 2024 Comp Plan periodic update, there are a couple items that we need to update in 2025, this being one of them. We introduced this to the Planning Commission back in February. Took us some time to get a consultant on board to identify some gaps within our code and provide some best available science. So there are several attachments in the packet tonight that we just wanted to highlight a couple of items. Really get you just a good solid background on the items that we're needing to update that are going to be coming back before you in an ordinance to update Chapter 1488 to be compliant with the Growth Management Act. So just a reminder, there are 5 types of critical areas that are identified in the Growth Management Act. They're in the RCW, wetlands, what are called second being what are called critical aquifer recharge areas. Frequently flooded areas, geologically hazardous areas, and then fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, which are primarily streams. So this update, we are basically looking to refresh the code to make sure that it is consistent with the Growth Management Act, that it reflects all best available science. The last major update was back in 2019. And so kind of at first blush, it looks like we are largely compliant with the Growth Management Act, but there are a couple of items that we do need to update. So as far as the items in your packet tonight, so attachment one was what's called the gaps analysis. Basically, the consultant looked through chapter 1488, compared that to GMA requirements, best available science, and provided an assessment of items that it either needed to be clarified or updated or added. That best available science review is included as a attachment two. Apologies for the length of the packet, but we did want to get you the technical background information as well. And then attachment three is kind of a subset of the best available science and gaps analysis. It's really focused on this new concept for basically how we manage stream buffers and some of the best available science and guidance from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. It's kind of a shift away from just evaluating streams just on their buffer width and really looking at the way that they function, the functions that they provide for water quality, the functions that they provide for habitat, and the concept of that site potential tree height we'll get into a little bit more, but it's basically utilizing a model where you look at a riparian area, so the area around a stream, you evaluate the types of tree species that are there, what the maximum potential tree height at 200 years of age for that tree is, and then potentially establishing a corresponding buffer. So if you have a tree that can grow to 235 feet in height, then the corresponding buffer of that riparian area would be 235 feet. And so this would be a pretty drastic change if we just strictly administered it that way, and just went kind of with the model code from WDFW. It would quadruple and almost quintuple buffer widths in some areas of the city, in actually a lot of areas of the city. The majority of the city has been identified with tree species that can grow up to 235 feet in height in optimal conditions. So this would be a pretty drastic change. So we're going to get into that a little bit more, but we're already having conversations with the Department of Fish and Wildlife as far as how we can, provide ecological function while also acknowledging that we are a community that's largely reliant on infill development, that if we quadruple or quintuple our buffers, we're getting rid of a lot of buildable land in the city, and we'd really need to reassess really the whole comprehensive plan and our growth targets.
Again, that's based on a tree eventually becoming 200 years old. So it could be a 25-year-old tree and only be 20 feet tall right now. But we have to protect for the potential that in the next 175 years, it could get big.
That's the concept of, site potential. It's, it is. It's all about potential at that 200 years of age. And so it's an interesting concept. So.
Example, the state already does that. Department of Ecology already does that for stormwater management. That you have to model at pre-development conditions. So it's the same idea that you would be supposing you in a fully treed area and the runoff is being absorbed and captured by those trees. So it's not a new concept, but in highly urbanized areas, it's a very hard concept to be able to fully ever meet, that.
A quick question on the trees themselves. When they do this analysis, do they take into account whether that tree is kind of a native species of the region or an imported tree? A tree that would be appropriate and live well here versus something that might not?
When I look through the kind of, obviously there's the memo that's provided in the packet tonight, but then we'll actually went onto the website. There is a website from Department of Fish and Wildlife where you can go in and you can see the tree species. Primarily, those are evergreen species that are native to the area that have, the possibility and opportunity to grow to these heights. I would say that I haven't seen a whole lot of 235-foot Doug firs around Lake Stevens. But I guess the potential is there for them in optimal and pre-development conditions.
Yeah, I think those left town probably about 150 years ago.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be more than 200 years by the time it gets to that height. So, so they are primarily native species. I can't really think of, evergreens that probably wouldn't be native to here that would have that potential for growth.
Yeah.
So,
Doug fir and red cedars. This would touch that.
all right. So there, kind of the majority of the code is actually looking pretty good. The gaps analysis kind of identified some issues as far as definitions or general provisions, clarifying intent. So those are things like making sure that we align these things with the WAC, the Washington Administrative Code, or the Revised Code of Washington. There are a couple areas where we need to revise some of the language to reflect best available science. And then providing clarity on, some of the allowed activities within critical areas were a couple of the items that were identified in multiple sections and across multiple critical areas types. There basically it identified no needed updates for the frequently flooded areas section and just very minor ones, basically updates to definitions for the geologically hazardous areas section. So basically 2 out of the 5 critical area types essentially don't need any update. Relatively minor updates to the wetlands section, really kind of identifying habitat corridors. We have some opportunities for buffer reductions and buffer averaging, so providing a little bit more best available science on that, but nothing that's really, a really high hurdle to jump as far as that. Where we're really seeing kind of the updates are specifically in 2 areas. So we're going to start and kind of build upon the discussion of the stream buffers and basically kind of shifting to this model that Fish and Wildlife is proposing as far as treating them like riparian management zones. So again, just how that whole area functions as opposed to just focusing on the buffer width. So this is included in section 6.4.2.2 of attachment 2, which is that best available science. It goes into more detail on what's involved with that. Again, this is based on the premise of establishing a riparian management zone that corresponds with the distance of the riparian management zone would correspond with the potential tree height of a 200-year-old tree species within that area. So as mentioned, we have multiple areas in the city that are either perennial or seasonal streams that currently have a 50-foot buffer, and almost all of those streams have been identified as having a site potential tree height of 235 feet. So you're looking at about a 470% increase in the buffer width if we were to administer it just as that. There are opportunities to do alternatives analysis, to work with Fish and Wildlife, to try to show through a combination of best available science and consistency with other components of the Growth Management Act. Obviously, the Growth Management Act has multiple goals, multiple policies. You need to balance environmental protection with employment opportunities, with housing needs. There's a whole lot of things that go above and beyond maybe than the items that are generally within the purview of Fish and Wildlife, and sometimes maybe that they forget about a little bit as far as trying to implement some of these models. So we are consulting with them. I've sent them an email just to so we can chat about this. We've kind of been digesting these documents that we received from our consultants for a few weeks now. We received them at the end of August. And so we've kind of been chewing through those and just trying to figure out a strategy. And so we did just want to make sure that we shared them sooner rather than later with the Planning Commission, just to make sure that kind of you understand the concepts, that you're able to ask any questions of staff, give any preliminary opinions, and kind of any suggestions on how to handle this.
Planner Levitan, it's Commissioner Connor Davis. Is there, I know this is novel, but have any other municipalities around the area made headway with communication through Fish and Wildlife on not just clarification, but modification to these? Yes, you continue to bring that up. I just don't know if some colleagues in other municipalities are making any headway.
There have been, yeah. I mean, we've looked at some jurisdictions. Mount Lake Terrace is a little bit further along in their process than we are. Marysville is kind of at a similar stage, and I've been in conversations with one of their planners as far as kind of what their strategy has been. Obviously, we have very similar characteristics, especially in the northwest portion of the city. It just blends in seamlessly with Marysville and those kind of large RMZs continue on into Marysville. And so if, there may be some opportunities for, and they use the same consultants, so there may be some opportunities for kind of some joint thoughts on that. But yeah, there have been some examples that even Fish and Wildlife had thrown out, offered up to us. And I've looked at some of those, and they don't all strictly adhere just to the site potential tree height model. They build in kind of this basically kind of this alternative analysis. If you can show that you're still providing kind of the necessary function, the water quality protection, the water treatment that, streams, riparian areas and associated wetlands tend to provide. If you can document that and then kind of justify it through, hey, these are our needs, these are areas, important areas for growth. We also have a concurrent project through the Public Works Department. They're developing what's called a basins plan for the different watersheds. And so there might be some opportunities to identify potential enhancement projects that we could then kind of present that to Fish and Wildlife and say, hey, if we look at kind of focusing on these areas that have the most function and really doing some improvements there, would there be some opportunities to kind of do some reductions in other areas that don't provide nearly the same function? So we're kind of looking at different strategies right now, just because I think a lot of other jurisdictions are dealing with this as well. You look at it and the first reaction, even us as seasoned planners, is like, wow, what are we going to do here? And so we're kind of working with our consultants, working with Fish and Wildlife, reaching out to different jurisdictions as far as what some of our options and strategies might be.
And then to piggyback off that question, this is Janice Huxford. What is the unincorporated Snohomish County doing?
So they updated their ordinance, and I actually haven't looked as closely. I need to look at the county one to see what exactly they did on there, as I focus more on the cities, but that would be good. The county critical areas ordinance, I would say, is maybe not entirely reflective of the most up-to-date, best available science. They were coming from kind of a much older code, and it would have been an even more gigantic leap from them, from like their 2006 or
Right.
2007 code up to something that reflects 2025 best available science. But that is a good reminder that I'd like to look at the county and kind of how they've been handling this issue.
I mainly just have a comment that, the state implemented a Growth Management Act, and the general philosophy of this Growth Management Act is to designate that there are certain areas that are primarily for people to be, and then there's rural areas that are primarily where nature is predominant. And that in the urban areas, they're purposely keeping those urban areas limited and small so that the rural areas can be for the environmental part. Now we have Department of Fish and Wildlife saying, no, we need to have even urban areas. Downtown Seattle is going to be designated as there could be a tree there that's going to cause the environment to be a priority over human needs. And when I look, I appreciate that there's like zoom ins of this map on there, and there's not just a few homes. There's, that area encroaches over dozens, if not up to 100 homes in the city would then be in in these riparian zones. And there's one quote in here that was the most alarming. It's on page 89 of the packet. It's on the very bottom of 89. It says, acknowledging that establishing functional RMZs using the recommended methods may not be practical in many developed areas. WDFW recommends effective watershed management, preservation, and protection, resulting in nearly full restoration of riparian ecosystem habitat functions as is feasible within existing constraints. So if they want to have full restoration of riparian ecosystems, they're basically saying that eventually those areas, all structures will be removed from all those areas. I don't know how they're gonna do that, but it makes the small space that people are allowed to live even smaller. And I know this is a complaint, it's not directed towards you, it's directed towards the Fish and Wildlife, but it's really ridiculous that, and as you mentioned, that they're looking at this through their eyes, which is Fish and Wildlife are predominant over every other priority, not the economy, not people, but we are here in the urban areas, humans prevail. At least that's what I believe that they're trying to say and with the Growth Management Act, but not anymore.
And so the direction we've been working, I think aligns with your perspective that we're going to pursue this alternative evaluation where, as Dave has stated, and in their documentation, you can get up to about 95% of the functional value within 100 feet. So that's really where we want to have as a starting point. And then do site-specific reviews is what we're going to propose to see if the buffer can go up or down at that point. And in our code as it's currently written and will continue to be written, there are going to be exceptions for pre-developed areas. So there's no intent that neighborhoods or anything else will be destroyed now or in the future for those purposes.
But if someone buys a home that's dilapidated and wants to tear down and rebuild, would they, and it's fully within this zone, this 200-foot buffer, that's, well, more like a 500-foot wide buffer surrounding the streams, would that redevelopment or rebuilding of a home not be allowed?
Under the way the code is currently drafted, it would be allowed to be rebuilt because there's been substantial modification to the site already, so it's already functionally impaired. And I don't believe we're proposing to remove any language that would prohibit the rebuilding of structures in previously disturbed areas.
And the general way that we treat whether critical areas or shoreline areas, if you have a disturbed area, you can generally kind of replace within that general, like for like within that general footprint. If you're wanting to further extend into a buffer, that's where, the code really starts to come into play as far as that it becomes much more difficult, and the code generally doesn't allow that.
So basically, all structures within those zones are locked in. No more, I guess, no net loss, as they say.
I mean, that is one approach that we could take, and we want to, identify areas. I think a lot of our strategy, and we have Cameron here tonight, who's been doing a great job helping us with some of the mapping, is kind of doing an overlay of these RMZs with our buildable lands data, with areas where, a lot of these stream segments seem to be either piped or underground. And I know that there is some, there's a push from WDFW to also daylight streams as well, but there are streams that are going under roads, there are streams that are going under houses, that run right along the side of them, that obviously you're never going to create a buffer that big for a house that was built in 2020.
And so there's no fish or wildlife in this area that the Department of Fish and Wildlife are trying to protect.
Well, and I think it's kind of a two-pronged strategy. Russ mentioned that, providing a minimum 100-foot buffer for all streams would, generally point to where their best available science shows that you get, somewhere between an 88, 90, 95%, it achieves 88, 90, 95% of the desired effects for water quality, for nitrogen removal, for all of these things that, these areas are intended to provide, similar to how wetlands have a water quality function. These riparian areas do as well. So I understand that conceptually, jumping from 100 feet to 235 feet is a big jump for potentially a 5% increase in function.
Yeah.
And that's where you really need to be evaluating, hey, if we double our stream buffers for type N, perennial and seasonal streams that are non-fish bearing, which is the majority of our streams, we do have what are called type F streams. But if we went from 50 feet to 100 feet on those perennial and seasonal non-fish bearing streams, and then potentially, some of the recommendations are to bump up the fish bearing streams, which are currently 100-foot minimum buffer, potentially raising that to 150 feet, which would create more habitat surrounding these areas for streams that are documented to have fish in them. And that's really, obviously, given their name, is a big, big focus of WDFW. That's an opportunity that would bring fish bearing streams in alignment with what are called type S streams, which are shorelines of the state if they have a certain, volume and kind of velocity as far as, the way that the stream functions. There's kind of this hierarchy of streams, and they have associated stream buffers depending on their characteristics. So, those are all things that we're going to be bringing up to them. This would, we're not saying that we want to keep the status quo. We're saying we need to find something kind of in the middle that balances all of these different competing interests within an urban environment.
I appreciate you're working with them and trying to get those buffers as small as they will allow. And I'll be very interested to see what comes out of those negotiations and as far as maps and how those overlay into the existing structures and areas that are in the area, in the city.
Right, great.
And just for the recording later, that dialogue was Commissioner Morton. I shared the same, it seemed a conflict of interest with everything else that we have been focused on in reading through the packet. And on your point, we do have some properties that may be built out, that have large trees on them and perhaps streams, who knows if they're underground. But if they're only built partially and the rest is undeveloped, but it is one, you know what I mean? So there's a slippery slope there. If there is, yes, you can rebuild the existing dilapidated, but the rest of it is going to be walled off because there's something underground that you can't see. That is going to severely impact the buildable lands that we have available. I also, just as a side note, on a project that we did, we had to put into conservatorship several trees on our own personal property. And that again was with Snohomish County at the time. But they allowed us to move forward with the project only if we deemed these trees untouchable, which I thought was interesting. And I'm wondering what law, and we did it because we love our trees, but at the time, that was a big deal to them, just that we put them in conservatorship. Weird.
One lesson, this should be pretty quick. If, say the buffer, 250-foot buffer, the city gets it, limited down, or there's only certain uses that are allowed. Would light use, whatever light use might be, but say walking trails, like small hiking trails or bike paths, is that type of use that would be allowed through these riparian zones? Because it's not like a major redevelopment of these sites.
Yeah, there are some items that are identified as far as kind of some exempt or allowed activities, that's, would need to be evaluated for best available science and for potential impacts to really justify them. I don't think, if you say have a non-paved trail that runs all, through a riparian area to provide access to the stream.
Like a railroad grade, just, normal. walking, hiking path.
Yeah, so we can look into that a little bit more. You know, because I don't think the intention is to make it so you can't access the natural resources within your community. There's got to be a way to get down there, but that's something that we can look into a little bit more, and I'm happy to, if that's a concern of the planning commission. Obviously, our strategy is, you know, to try to come up with something that reflects Lake Stevens and that provides, you know, that meets a variety of different goals that are identified within the comprehensive plan. But yeah, and one of those is access and natural resources and recreation. Yeah, there's a whole lot that goes on. I mean, it's a pretty complex topic, and trying to balance all of these competing interests can definitely be difficult. But no, that was,
Time again, a lot of the surveys that the city sends out, you know, one of the things at the top of the list is walking paths.
Yep.
People want access to them.
So your example, like the Centennial Trail that's built on an old railroad grade, that would already be exempted because it's a prior disturbed area. Our current code and our future code allows for walking trails, things like that within buffers. So I can't imagine that that's something we won't continue to allow. But yeah, there has to be some sort of, as Dave said, access into our natural resource areas.
Yeah, if you look on page 107 of the packet, there's a table with all the different uses for different categories of areas. Cell towers are always allowed anyway. I find this, yeah, it's at the bottom of the list.
all right. So that was kind of the first major test, and kind of first and foremost, the main one that we've been kind of chewing on the last couple of weeks. The second one, which we had introduced, yeah.
Before you go there, and I don't intend for this to open up too much, best available science, does the state give you like this list of publications that you should be classifying as
There
best
are
available
references.
science, or are you tasked to go figure out what best available science means?
There are a couple documents that are kind of prominently mentioned and featured as far as, you know, from the Department of Ecology on wetlands, from Fish and Wildlife on these riparian management zones, from Department of Natural Resources on some of the geologically hazardous areas. But cities can supplement it. So kind of the purpose of having a consultant firm was to really look through it and do that assessment and to evaluate our existing code against, you know, really what that best available science is. So it's a combination. I believe at the end of that document, I think there's, you know, a number of different references and, you know, some appendices to that. And so, yeah, they don't point to say, hey, there's just two documents. They identify that there are different departments, especially at the state level, that have really that expertise in these topic areas. And that really should be the starting point, but cities and other jurisdictions are welcome to supplement that. You basically just need to justify your science. If you can point to other science that says, hey, I don't agree with this at all, and this is why, then that's, you know, an opportunity to include that within your best available science review.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Then let's move forward.
All right, and so I was just going to touch really quickly. We had talked about the CARA regulations, the critical aquifer recharge areas, back in May, just to introduce that concept. At that time, we were hoping that this was the largest component of the critical areas ordinance update. This is the one critical area that we don't currently have identified, and so we need to create a new section similar to the other four critical areas that are already covered in 1488. We'd be creating a new section. It would be basically establishing things like permissible uses. So if you have, you know, a CARA basically that has susceptible drinking water sources in aquifers adjacent to heavy industrial uses or heavy industrial zones, how do we kind of establish a land use framework that acknowledges, again, the need for our employment, the environmental regulations that are already on the books that help to control, you know, potential pollution, and evaluate that against, you know, protecting groundwater supplies, which obviously are not the primary source of drinking water in Lake Stevens or the surrounding area, but there are areas that do rely on these. So making sure that they're adequately protected. So those things like regulated and prohibited uses, monitoring requirements, best management practices for different types of uses. We have found a number of different, examples from different jurisdictions that we think are good sources for that. So as we start to develop the codes, and develop that language, we'll make sure to bring it back, before the planning commission, hold additional work sessions in advance of the public hearings for this ordinance. And, yeah, the critical aquifer recharge areas that are identified in Lake Stevens are there's a lower susceptibility, lower vulnerability. So we're, the initial analysis is that, we should be able to handle this, relatively easily with some responsible, and responsive land use regulations that kind of balance, a variety of different competing interests, especially within our industrial area. So with that, we've already touched on a number of these things, but basically kind of a summary of our initial analysis is that, that 235-foot buffer that, has been identified through about 80% of our stream reaches, probably is not, very feasible as far as allowing us to meet our growth targets. So that's kind of where we're coming from as far as our conversations with DFW and our approach to updating the code to reflect best available science. Reached out to WFW, working with the surface water team within Public Works about potential alignment with some of the work that they're doing, with some of the basin work that they're doing. And then again, there are a number of different CAR regulations already on the books. Snohomish County has some, Edmonds has done it, a variety of different cities. I think Marysville is working on theirs as well because they're currently lacking, and they have kind of very similar characteristics where the two jurisdictions meet. And so with that, tried to touch on at least a high level, kind of the various technical components, but happy to provide, additional discussion or additional analysis of that if there are questions either tonight, or feel free to reach out to me or to Amber or to Russ. Going to be briefing the city council next month on this. And then really we're already in the process of trying to identify code language, how to get that language out to the community, especially within, I think, the industrial areas. It's going to be important depending on what we come up with, depending on what the additional analysis shows. The residential areas related to CARAs, residential uses in general are not, prohibited. They're going to be allowed. It's more on the management of the site and how you treat and try to prevent and mitigate pollution. That's really the focus within industrial areas. Within residential areas. With industrial areas, it gets a little bit trickier. So it's really getting in and evaluating, what does the Department of Ecology already do that, can help to ensure that these competing uses and these kind of competing resources don't conflict with one another. So that's really going to be the focus. And then again, the idea was to have this done by the end of 2025. There are a lot of jurisdictions that it's looking like that's not going to happen. And so we haven't heard kind of any alarm bells going off with either the Department of Commerce or with WDFW. We do want to continue to work on this to get it done as quickly as possible. But we also want to make sure that it is the right sized approach for Lake Stevens. There have been jurisdictions that have essentially adopted that site potential tree height model and then allowed for somebody to document through their critical areas report why it shouldn't apply to them. I think we'd rather have something that's a little bit more realistic, that doesn't put all the impetus on the applicant and have to do some really, really detailed analysis for potentially a relatively small project. And so we want to make sure that we have regulations that reflect Lake Stevens while also ensuring, as much environmental protection as possible. So happy to answer any questions. And yeah, you'll be hearing more about this in the coming months.
And one other thing I might want to do tonight before we get to questions, Dave, maybe you can just summarize what you've heard to make sure that we're in line with the planning commission before we present to the council. I've heard a couple of concepts from a couple of individuals that seem pretty aligned, so just want to make sure we're all hearing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was general consensus on that the identified, especially the 235-foot buffers would not work within the context of Lake Stevens, within our needs for both residential and employment growth, that it doesn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense, especially in areas that are already fully developed. So that's kind of the first thing that I've heard. Kind of identified, I think there were some good questions about what other jurisdictions are doing, so we'll make sure to look at the county's critical areas ordinance update, look at a couple of other jurisdictions, really with a focus on areas that have proposed this alternative approach. Didn't hear, I think because we've already touched on the CARs, and I think the CARs are pretty straightforward. Didn't really necessarily need or expect a whole lot of feedback because we've already had that conversation. We just wanted to let you know kind of what was reflected within the updated documents that we had received from our consultants. But really, it sounds like kind of staff and the commission are generally aligned with the proposed approach as far as working collaboratively with Fish and Wildlife, working with other jurisdictions, looking at our buildable lands, doing as much documentation to denote, where we think that responsible land use regulations can be put in place that, do prioritize environmental protection without neglecting all of the other important concepts that are expressed within our recently adopted comp plan.
Thank you.
I would just end with the last piece, the industrial district. As you all know, I have responsibilities there, employees there, and a business that I run out of there. So anything that is done coming on the heels of being annexed in for a large part in that area to existing businesses that have nowhere else to move in the immediate area would be a huge impact. So to tread lightly and mitigate as much as possible what's being superimposed on these already existing businesses.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. And just so from the CARA side of things, the aquifer side of things, yeah, that is going to be a major focus of our efforts as far as evaluating how can we make sure that we have adequate industrial land while making sure that we have a whole suite of environmental regulations in place that address, any potential pollution and set up regulations that prevent that. I mean, prevention is obviously better than mitigation wherever possible. I would note, and I didn't really bring it up very much, but the critical areas ordinance, we've talked about it a little bit in the past. It doesn't apply to areas within shoreline jurisdiction. So those are shorelines of the state. So that's obviously Lake Stevens, but it's also a couple of our streams, including Little Pilchuck. And so that's subject to the Shoreline Management Act and not to the critical areas ordinance. So that's something that we don't have to update at this point. We're probably going to, we're going to have a periodic update to the SMP as well, the Shoreline Master Program. And so I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be guidance from, Fish and Wildlife similarly, that they're going to ask for it to be implemented on the shoreline side of things as well. But there are parts of the city where we don't have to worry about that at this point, but it will be coming down the pipeline in the near future. So.
Any other questions? Are we all shaking our heads simultaneously? Sorry, didn't mean to sound at all disrespectful. Let's move on then, shall we?
All right. All right, so still David Levitan, still principal planner. That's changed a couple times over the last few years. So we wanted to just touch base. We've had a couple discussions, really good discussions on step housing. So this is emergency shelters, transitional housing, emergency housing, and permanent supportive housing. Our last discussion, I guess that was last month. I think it was, yeah, the August 18th, I think was the last time we talked about this. I think we got some good consensus as far as this kind of separate approach between the permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, and then having, you know, kind of a different set and a different set of regulations and a different process and supplementary use regulations specifically for emergency housing and shelters. We had talked a little bit about buffers in between individual uses. And so there was some discussion of that. And as part of that discussion, we also talked about was there any interest in establishing kind of protective buffers? So not just buffers between individual uses that are both, say, emergency housing or both emergency shelters, like a specific distance that you need to have between two of the same use, but also should there be and do there need to be and are they supported regulations of protective buffers? So for example, we currently have 1,000-foot buffer between marijuana facilities and uses such as schools and parks and commercial childcare centers, libraries, basically areas where, you know, youth under 18 are likely to be present. And so wanted to do some just mapping to help to show that. I had presented some really terrible maps at previous meetings, so I had Cameron prepare some much better maps. So this first one is basically just a reminder as far as where emergency housing and shelters are required to be permitted under House Bill 1220 from way back in 2021. So basically any zone that allows hotels. So essentially primarily our sub areas. So downtown Lake Stevens, 20th Street, Southeast Corridor, Lake Stevens Center, which is obviously the west side of the lake. Also includes Soper Hill. It includes little pockets off of 204, a couple on Lundeen / Lakeview, up off of Grade and 92. So basically anywhere that are commercial areas are where hotels are permitted. So these uses are required to be allowed there as well. As noted when we discussed this, you know, we went through some of the requirements specifically that are the draft code has for emergency housing and emergency shelters, site management plans, the buffer between individual uses, that generally the fire code or the building code is a good way to regulate maximum occupancy, that we don't necessarily need kind of a specific number on that. Basically let kind of the other zoning, building and fire code regulations kind of dictate that. Talked a little bit about the public notice. We had initially proposed language that was very similar to the short-term rentals, which is basically focused on adjacent property owners and those directly across the street. There was some interest in expanding that area. And if we are going to do that and basically implement a 300-foot notice, that would be more representative of a type 2 land use application process, which includes public notice and opportunities for public comment. It would be hard to really say, hey, we're going to require a 300-foot notice, but still put you through a type 1, because the public notice and the public comment is really what differentiates a type 1 from a type 2. So if we're going to really replicate that process, it really makes sense just to make it a type 2 permit instead of a type 1 permit. So those were some general discussions and thoughts. This potential buffer between the protected uses, we wanted to make sure that we looked at a variety of different options. And so had Cameron put together starting at 300 feet. So you look at the red, which was the base map, and then the yellow areas on the map are basically anywhere within 300 feet of, say, a park, a school, a daycare, a library. So as you can see, the largest impact at 300 feet is in downtown Lake Stevens, and that's driven primarily by where we are right now at North Cove. This whole kind of lot is considered a public park. And so that, would really, even at a 300-foot buffer between uses, there's a childcare center across the street as well, which would kind of extend that a little bit further north and really capture the northern part of downtown. So as you can see, even at 300 feet, everything basically east of the shopping center over here would not be permitted. Only the area east of the shopping center would be outside of that buffer, so it would largely limit potential development. So that's at 300 feet. It doesn't really affect 20th Street very much. You have Cavallaro Park and Cavallaro Mid-High that touches a little bit there in the southwest portion of 20th Street. There's a large childcare center just west of Frontier Village, which is really that blob kind of west of SR9. And then there's the school up by Soper Hill, which touches a good about half of that, even at 300 feet. And so this would be limiting, but it wouldn't completely prohibit the siting in the city or limit to the effect that we wouldn't be able to meet our growth targets. So this is one, starting at 300 feet, we just wanted to show that. When you bump it up to 500 feet, it really takes out pretty much all of downtown. Just as you push out that buffer, kind of between, it starts to pull in, kind of moving west from the school and then moving east from the park. It kind of scrunches everything in the middle, and there's not really anything left. There's not really much left to the north because of the childcare center here. So downtown would essentially, at a 500-foot buffer, would not be able to house any of these uses. And we would get into a situation where one of our main sub areas is essentially prohibited from having this, and there likely would be some pushback from the Department of Commerce on that, as far as, is that really compliant with House Bill 1220? It extends a little bit further north from Soper Hill up to the northern boundary of the city. A lot of that is, there's the personal storage facility. There's a couple other things that probably aren't going anywhere anyways, but you never know. It touches a little bit more in the Lake Stevens Center / Frontier Village area, but there's still, the bulk of that would still be, wouldn't be touched by a 500-foot buffer. Similarly for 20th Street Southeast Corridor, it picks up a couple additional properties when you go from 300 feet to 500 feet, but just where these potentially protected uses are, a couple 100 feet doesn't, exponentially increase the amount of land where these uses would then be prohibited. When you hit 1,000 feet, this is where we really start to get into where we'd be pretty limited and where these uses would be allowed. Again, it would take out in addition to not being allowed anywhere within downtown, it would essentially knock out all but the very northern tip of Soper Hill as we get up towards State Route 92. Essentially the whole west side of SR9 within Lake Stevens Center would basically leave. And then as you extend from where the new library is going to be towards the targets, it essentially leaves basically just Frontier Village on the east side of SR9. And then it essentially squeezes towards the middle, and it just leaves the central portion of the 20th Street Southeast Corridor. So I would say this would be one that would definitely would be hard really to justify from a House Bill 1220 perspective, as far as complying with the intent of that and being able to document that we have adequate land. Especially, these are already uses that are very hard to site. Land is obviously very expensive here. Getting funding, maybe especially within this current political environment, might be a little bit more difficult. And so we would really need to show the nexus between kind of public health and safety and why we feel this is needed if we were going to touch anything. Again, the marijuana facilities is 1,000-foot buffer, but those areas are obviously much more limited. They're really just up in the industrial area, both for the production and processing side of things, and also for our one retail dispensary. So that touches really not much of the city, whereas this would really encumber the majority of our commercial areas, which is where hotels are permitted and thus where the emergency housing and shelters are required to be permitted.
And I'll add one more point. As we mentioned, public health and safety, the Planning Commission has already considered some alternatives of setting criteria that would mandate that there would be public health and safety on those sites. So then adding the distance requirements, should be commensurate with the regulations that you've applied for sanitation, setting caps, the site management, all of those things. So essentially, it's hard, you'd be hard pressed to set 1,000-foot buffer, and you've already set regulations as well to control how those establishments are managed. So.
Yeah, thanks for that additional context. That's an important thing to consider. So again, just kind of a general analysis, the 1,000-foot buffer, I think would be hard to justify, especially if, given the supplementary use regulations that are already included within the draft code language. It's important to note that especially for emergency housing and emergency shelters where car ownership and car use is generally lower than, with other uses, that proximity and access to transit is important. So finding areas, and those are generally whether it's the 280 or some of the other lines that come up through Lake Stevens Center and that go along 20th Street and up 99th. Those are primarily within our sub areas. So we want to make sure that we align, access and services with areas that can be reasonably sited with these uses. And then there are some opportunities, as I mentioned, for downtown Lake Stevens. Really, North Cove Park is what drives it, and really is because it's a large site just west of kind of the main commercial area to the north, and then especially to the east. There's nothing that says which uses would potentially need to be protected. Should it be, schools seems kind of generally like a potentially a no-brainer as far as being at the highest prioritization. Do parks, and potentially daycares as well. Do parks need it? Do libraries need it? Areas where you're more likely to have, adults or just more traffic. So if we're coming at it from a potential public health and safety perspective, and we don't feel like we have adequate site management regulations and there are still concerns, what are the uses that we really think, potentially would be subject to this? And it could be that after listening to this, all the commissioners were like, where are you even coming from? I didn't, wasn't pushing for this. We just wanted to have that conversation just because there was some interest in this. And we're going to be chatting with the city council next week and really introducing some of the draft code language, and wanted to potentially include some minor updates to that before we move on to public hearings with the Planning Commission and then sending your recommendation back over to the city council. We just wanted to have kind of one final discussion and had some capacity on this meeting agenda. So just wanted to get your general thoughts. So happy to answer any questions, provide additional information, or just stop talking. So
This is Commissioner Connor Davis. Remember the last time we had this discussion, some of the emergency shelters in the region, particularly Bears Place, came up. 60–70% of the units there were contaminated. You might have brought it up.
it wasn't
sewer.
me, but it
But
was-
yeah,
And
Mike,
Everett,
that's right. And it's the unfortunate reality, a lot of these, and that was placed under Catholic Community Services. I might be
I believe.
phrasing that. There were people on site there. So it was checking off a lot of the boxes that you've discussed. When I look at the map and, 300-foot radius, that just working at North Lake Middle School, knowing that, Mount Pilchuck Elementary is right there as well. These do belong within the city, but that is an area that I would try to be strategic to honestly keep these kind of shelters as far away from schools, because the harsh reality is that we also live in Washington State and, you know, the Lake Stevens Police Department falls under the auspices of, you know, the state of Washington and the rules that they set about types of, you know, looseness around levels of criminality. That's, you know, that is just the reality of the state that we live in. So the 500-foot radius, when I look at that, seems to be a bit more appropriate because it does, you know, it takes out a lot of downtown, but it still leaves a lot of that area south of 20th Street that is not, you don't have these developed, you know, a lot of, it wouldn't impact as many residents, housing, neighborhoods that are there. You don't have, you know, Caballero is there much further west of these designated areas. That's my hesitancy because it, you know, again, these shelters, they deserve a place, but you also don't want to be the neighborhood that is stuck with one right next door to you. And I sure as heck don't want them next to schools, anywhere near schools. Anyways.
This is Commissioner Dewar. I fully support Commissioner Davis in that assessment. You know, for me, I think the most critical thing is that we require that there be supportive services associated with these properties and that that they do actively monitor and support them internally. So it's, you know, once it's not just enough to check the box, they have to continuously offer those services. And I share in your concern with placement of these. Looking at the map for 300, 500 and 1,000, I would agree 1,000 is off the table just in terms of the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And if 500 feet is a defensible position to take, I would be supportive of that.
Thank you. Other comments?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Morgan. I can see the argument for wanting to keep the shelters away from the schools, but not from parks and not from other shelters. Because as was mentioned, as David, you mentioned, there's adults that use the parks. Adults don't use schools. So, so I think that would be reasonable. As far as the distance, I'm in favor of 300 feet.
Thank you. Mr. Packard, comments?
Yeah, so can I just clarify a question? This is for just emergency housing, not all step housing.
Correct, just emergency housing and emergency shelters. I mean, and it could be for just emergency shelters. I mean, there's the way that we had set up the code is that the supplementary use regulations don't apply to permanent supportive housing or transitional housing, which tend to more mimic things like adult family homes, which we don't have these regulations for. That emergency housing and shelters are generally more transient populations. Obviously transitional is as well, but they tend to have a longer period of occupancy. So this would apply, but I mean, the way that we set up the code, it could be just to outdoor shelters. It could be just to ones that have a certain occupancy, you know, a certain number of residents. If you have a smaller use, then maybe this wouldn't be subject. So there's different ways that we can establish and frame this. So it's really up to we'd like to get some feedback from the commission on that component as well.
And are there any emergency housing facilities that would currently be in violation? Like if you imposed 500 feet, is there anything current that would automatically be out of code or be violating that 500-foot buffer?
No, we don't have anything that qualifies as emergency housing right now.
Okay.
So, and I mean, I've had, you know, Councilmember Jorstad is, you know, this is kind of her field of expertise, and I've had a conversation with her, and I think she understands the perspective on, you know, the desire for adequate protections. She did want to make sure, and I think she probably will bring up in the discussion the potential and the likelihood of these uses within Lake Stevens are relatively low just because of our lack of services, because of our lack of transit, because just in the difficulties in getting across the trestle. The lower population density than say Linwood or Everett. And so wanting to make sure that we acknowledge and respect concerns about public safety while still realizing, that the reality is that we could be coming up with very detailed regulations that are unlikely to be implemented. So,
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, I kind of align with Commissioner Dewar from the standpoint of 500 is defensible and leaning towards that. I'm not bothered by downtown being out of play, right? Just for the reasons you suggested, and it's so far from the other transportation and other services, right? 20th Street corridor, Highway 9, you still have large chunks of that space that is available. Up at Soper Hill, yeah, you lose that, but why would I need something up there if I have something more in the Frontier Village area? So I'm okay with the 500. I'm not bothered by 300, but yeah, I agree. 1,000 seems out of the question.
Thank you. And I'll just add that I was 500 all along. However, for the transportation portion that you just brought up, I think that it makes sense to keep any sort of emergency services on that side of the lake. Getting around the lake to downtown is, does not an emergency help. And I think that to protect that part of the city, and try to make it what we have often tried to make it in that, restaurants, walkability, parks, schools, someday hopefully even more makes sense. So I was always 500 and I would continue to promote that. Any other questions or comments?
Can I just add my appreciation for the maps that you drew? It really helps put things into perspective when you can flip through them like that and watch them. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. And I actually liked them in hard copies. Thank you for printing it to me.
This is
Fun.
Commissioner Morton.
I know, that was fun.
Just one question for the other commissioners. So when you say 500 feet from what? It's just schools or schools, parks and other shelters?
Schools, parks, and other shelters for me.
Agreed.
Third.
I'm only schools and parks. I'm fine with 300 for other shelters, but that just complicates your code. So just keep 500 for everything. But I'm not bothered by the multiple shelters being within 500 feet.
Any additional questions,
I'm just
thoughts, or
for school.
comments? Are there any other questions of us?
no, I think we'll be, sharing some of this feedback and some of the draft code language with the city council next week and happy to give an update at our next meeting. I don't think we're going to be touching on this topic. We have a couple other items for your next meeting, but happy within the director's report to just give kind of a quick overview maybe of that discussion, or you're obviously welcome to watch it as well. It'll be next Tuesday on the 23rd.
Excellent, thank you. Let's move on to item number 6 on our agenda, Commissioner reports. Commissioner Dewar, let's begin with you.
Just a couple questions from some of my neighbors. We're on the north end of the lake and Zipley Fiber is coming through and they are jackhammering and digging holes everywhere. One of the things that they're doing is they're taking the few sidewalks we have and turning them into big lunar landscapes, filling them back in with cold pack. Is there a plan or is there a way that we can petition to have those backfilled with actual concrete?
I don't know anything about the project you're talking about, but the typical restoration, if they're doing just cold patch, that would be just a temporary fix and they would have to be brought back up to whatever they were. So I
Great.
better check in with our public works.
I'll let my neighbors know. Thank you.
Mr. Packard.
Just some community things that I've been aware of, budget discussions are happening at the city council level, and so if anyone wants to get involved or give input into budget decisions and how that affects the planning and future use of property now. And then, on October 6th, I think, is a town hall event the city's promoting for city leaders to, the city leaders and staff to engage with the community. Again, what is the plan for the upcoming year, capital projects, et cetera. So good opportunity for people to get awareness and provide input where appropriate.
Thank you. Commissioner Connor Davis,
No report.
Commissioner Morton.
Just a comment, I really, am liking all the nice clean pavement, on Vernon Road. It's so nice to drive on that road and be so quiet inside the car. And, all it's amazing how quickly they can just rip up a road and put down pavement and get it all done in just like 2 days. And I appreciate all the work that they're doing on Main Street. It's, I know it's a big headache now, but I think everyone's gonna really enjoy the end result. So thanks for all you're doing. That's all.
Thank you. And Commissioner Packard?
Yeah, sorry, can I have to go back? I have a question on Main Street. The width of the sidewalks running from Boys and Girls Club up to the boat ramp or the boat access. Those are massive sidewalks. Can you help me understand? Is there a regulation that required that? Ultimately, my very selfish concern is boats are now, sorry,
Yes.
trucks with boat trailers are parking on that road.
Oh, really?
And they are definitely encroaching into the road. And it seems like if those sidewalks were just 6 inches more narrow on both sides, you wouldn't have that problem.
So with the downtown sub-area plan, there has been a long-term vision of having multi-use paths from the Boys and Girls Club, hopefully eventually up to the far end of the town.
Yep.
So those sidewalks are oversized so they can accommodate bike traffic and walkers.
But not voters.
Not
But not
boaters,
boaters.
or the people who are affected by the boaters whose trailers are now encroaching on the road. So it's not just me and my ability to park there. It's if I just want to drive past there now on a busy day, that gets very.
You gotta drive slow.
And,
That's-
Maybe to track the home advice.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
my fault.
You know,
This is
go ahead.
Commissioner Connor Davis. I sent through the Citizen View just a week or two ago, sent pictures through Citizen View. I was told to follow with the Lake Stevens Police Department. It's not only the boat trailer, they're parked and they take up, it's 3 effective parking spots, right, that they're using. And there were 6 trailers taking up the majority of the parking to the south of us here. And 5 of them, they had the tires up on the sidewalks about 3 or 4 feet on the sidewalk. And that's what provoked me to get in contact with the city and the police department. I understand there's a need, but I mean, at the end of the day, when we have nice days, like, we're blessed with, occasionally in the summer, there's been a weird one. We want for businesses to be able to bring customers in. And when there's boats parked here, they're not visiting the area businesses, but they're taking up 3 parking spots. I would honestly, and I know that it impacts boaters, but there's very limited net benefit to the city when people are out recreating on the lake. Great for them, right? But what I'm looking for is impact on sales tax dollars, impact on what we can do here in downtown. So I would actually prohibit boat parking along Main Street here, period. Get rid of the boat parking, I can figure it out. That's my 2 cents.
Interesting dialogue.
Mhm.
But an interesting segue. I actually had a meeting. It was in the minutes that I was going to, and I actually did. Aaron Halverson came out and met me on the side of South Lake Stevens Road. We walked South Lake Stevens Road down to Machias. They have a focus as Public Works Department to quiet traffic. So my plea to them, our plea to them, because it's not just me, it's a community thing on that south end of the lake, to do something on the South Lake Stevens / Machias cutoff T 3-way stop is, I think, hitting on ears that are willing to listen. The city mayor has also started the process of hiring a consultant to look at that. And we are trying to supersede that process to do the more inexpensive and faster idea of doing a pilot so that we can at least see what's going on without incurring the cost of hiring a consultant to tell us what we know is going to happen. So with that said, I told Mr. Halverson, Director Halverson, that I would bring that up at the meeting this evening. And he is wanting me to continue to impress upon everybody, citizens and city staff alike, that their focus is very much geared towards traffic and the quieting of such. And they are willing to move things around in their priorities where it follows and makes sense with the development of our community. So I said I would, and I did. Thank you. Anything else on commissioners? All right. With that said, let's moving over to the planning director's report. Russ, this is all you.
Okay, I don't have a lot to report tonight. I've been out of town for the last couple of weeks, the longest vacation I've probably taken in 10 years. So nice to be away, nice to be back. You have a printout in front of you tonight. Planning Manager Schmidt put that together just to give you an update on some of the development activity and specifically larger projects that go through the hearing examiner, just for your interest. What's not included on there is we've also had 2 code enforcement appeals, both related to critical areas that have also gone to the hearing examiner. Happy to try and answer any questions that the commission may have tonight.
Russ, Commissioner Connor Davis, the museum development, mixed use development, what's the current status of that? I know fall of 2025
Yeah,
is.
it is under permit review right now. We're expecting a resubmittal next week, hoping to go to ad for that project in October, and would hope for about a 7 to 9 month construction.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too.
That too.
Are there any other discussion items for the greater good? Hearing, seeing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Do we second?
Commissioner Dewar seconds.
So Commissioner Morton, Commissioner Dewar, first and second, all those in favor?
I.
Thank you so much.